It's my pleasure to rise today and speak into supply, particularly looking at the realization of children's rights through this budget that's been tabled. Nelson Mandela said, "There can be no keener revelation of a society's soul than the way in which it treats its children." And so I think with that inspiration, with that lens, I wanted to talk about what's happening for young people in Nova Scotia and in Canada, what's happening for young people through this budget, and what could have happened to make lives better. And before I start, actually, I just really want to thank that this work doesn't emerge it emerges from a global network of child rights advocates, and in particular, my remarks draw from the work of Lisa Wolfe at UNICEF, Sarah Austin at Children First Canada, Dr. Andrew Link, Dr. Laura Stymus, and Dr. Sarah Kirk at the IWK and Dalhousie University. I'd like to dedicate to the memory of the former Senator Landon Pearson, Canada's first children's senator, who passed away earlier this year at the age of 93, and as well to honor the power and justice making of all young people who activate in Canada. So here's the deal. I think that in Canada we have this perception that actually our kids are doing well, that we're doing well for our kids. And unfortunately, by all measures, that's actually not true. So UNICEF, for instance, conducts regular reporting around how children are doing by specific standards in different countries. And we used to rank 10th amongst affluent countries. However, we now rank 30 out of 39th. And it's been a sharp downward trend. We really are reaching a tipping point where young people are really, the future of our country are in jeopardy, and we're going to really start seeing the long-term outcomes that come with ignoring this important section of our community. And it's up to us here in the legislature. There are so many things that impact the lives of young people where government can intervene and improve outcomes. So I'll just want to paint a picture of the situation of children and youth in Canada at this point. So I'm wondering if folks would be able to guess at the most common reason for death for young people under the age of 18 in Canada. Suicide. It's actually unintended injuries and violence. So it's actually things like driving, emergencies, and so unintentional injuries. And the second greatest cause is suicide. What does that say about a society where we're not creating places in our communities where young people are safe, that we're not following practices that keep people safe, and then that in fact our young people are suffering so much that they have, it's the second greatest cause of death. And not only that, it's not just about our experience here, but it's actually we have one of the highest rates of adolescent suicides as per UNICEF, and we rank 35 out of 39 countries. And so that means that 35 countries are doing a much better job at keeping their young people alive. And I think it's been particularly important to consider mental health, because the actual onset of most major health issues, mental health issues, happens at the sort of the transition from under 18 into early adulthood. So 70% of mental health issues are onset during that period. But at the same time, we actually only see that 25% of young people who need mental health care are able to access that. There's other concerns about how we're also supporting young people who come from diverse backgrounds. So transgender adolescents, for instance, aged 15 to 17, are 7.6 times as likely to have attempted suicide compared to their peers. Young people in Canada are not living lives free from abuse. Approximately one in three Canadians report experiencing some kind of child abuse by the age of 15. And the statistic is higher amongst certain communities, including Indigenous populations. Approximately 1 in 3 children with disabilities also have faced violence in their lives under 18. Amongst students in Canada, 1 in 4 children surveyed experienced sexual harassment or assault in schools by grade 7. And the prevalence of online sexual abuse has been increasing within the last 5 years at higher rates in Canada than most of the other 39 countries that UNICEF tracks. And these are sort of affluent, higher income countries. Recently, UNICEF released a report on how countries are doing in supporting young people in the face of the threat of climate change and environmental degradation. Young people, of course, are the least responsible, but going to be the most impacted by climate change. And Canada ranked 28th out of 39 upper income countries. So we're not even doing well in terms of responding to the greatest threat, perhaps, to the coming generations. There's some statistics that I think are really important. We have the 3rd largest freshwater reserve in the world, but we rank 24th in the rate of child illness from unsafe water. We're also, and things that really touch on the functions of us here in this House and what we can do as government. We are actually the highest generator of municipal waste, ranking last amongst 36 countries that UNICEF was able to gather data from. Now, of course, early in the mandate of this government, those of us who think about children's rights were very excited to see in the Minister of Community Services mandate letter the directive to work across departments to establish a 5-year target for the reduction of childhood poverty in this province. Suffice to say, unfortunately, that hasn't happened. We don't have a plan, we don't have a target. However, I can talk about some of the things that we could be doing and we should be doing and that we missed out on in this budget. So it might seem daunting to consider how do you reduce childhood poverty. And luckily, we actually have lots of help on how to realize progress for children and their better outcomes. Firstly, the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child presents a framework to guide the way forward. Ratified by Canada in December 1991, the UNCRC contains 54 binding articles that affirm a child's rights, including an adequate standard of health, which is Article 27, access to education, and opportunities for play, leisure, and rest. We also have information about what's happening in Nova Scotia. The One Chance to Be a Child report was developed by a broad cross-section of researchers, pediatric specialists, nonprofits, and community members, and was published last year. This was a really important step for Nova Scotia because we actually had nowhere and had no way of understanding with very, very limited data how were young people in Nova Scotia doing? How are young people in Nova Scotia doing? My colleague from Cape Breton Centre, Whitney Peer, talked about the high rates of child poverty and the high rates of food insecure houses with children. I think we all can feel that in our soul, that one in 4 families with children are considered to be income insecure. From 2018, and I think the stats would be higher, and our partners in food access like Feed Nova Scotia could help us define this, but nearly 1 in 5 children in Nova Scotia lived in a food insecure household in 2018. And the thing is, we actually saw that there's some pretty easy ways to address childhood poverty. So in 2020, when people were supported by special supports because of the pandemic, guess what happened to childhood poverty in Nova Scotia? It dropped radically. So we increased families' incomes, and children were better off. And I think we also, there's other places from which we have tools. So there's something called a Child Rights Impact Assessment. Impact assessments are instruments used to avoid unintentional consequences. So a CRIA is used to understand how public policy that's being made affects young people. And this isn't just theoretical. The province of New Brunswick is the first jurisdiction in North America to have adopted a mandatory CRIA process for all cabinet-level policy decisions, having formally implemented this since 2013. So, I think sometimes when, people think about public policy tools and instruments, maybe that seems like it makes the work more onerous. In my experience, in my estimation, in fact, it makes the work easier because then all these cabinet members would know, we would know as members, what's the impact of the work we're doing on our most vulnerable citizens. And it would be laid out for us in an evidenced way that we could then take into account as we're making decisions. We would, which is not to say that every policy would actually benefit young people, and I would argue that we're seeing that they don't, but we would understand that, and I think that's really important. I don't think any of us want unintended negative consequences on young people, and we certainly want to advance the well-being of young people. So what are we missing in Nova Scotia? What could happen now to make an immediate difference, and could be done either through this budget or through the legislative process? So the Child and Family Services Act, which was approved in 2017, has many weaknesses. But one thing we could do to make things better would be to remove the failure to provide to the child adequate food, clothing, or shelter from the Act, and instead invest in preventing child apprehension by supporting families. We can make things better for young people by supporting their families. We've removed too many children for the concept of neglect, when in fact, there's actually not a need for care and protection. The parents are not willfully harming their children. The parents are likely working very hard to support their children, and they simply can't on the current rates of income assistance and disability support that we currently provide for families. How could you provide for a family adequately on what is provided? The current budget provides funding to overhaul the foster care system. I think this is an important part of the system, but again, I can't help but note that there actually wasn't the same amount allocated to families in need to help prevent the need for young people to go into foster care. We do have an inadequate foster care system. I support it strongly. My partner and I are in the process of being approved as foster parents, so we are part of the system, but what I would rather see is that, in fact, we're supporting families in this province. So we need to increase and index ESIA and disability supports. We need to increase our spending on youth mental health, dental care, vision care, pharma care. Obviously, we need to implement our commitments around inclusive education, make post-secondary education more affordable, and ensure that essential costs are available and affordable, so food, internet, and safe housing. My colleague spoke about the establishment of a Child and Youth Commission. So the role of child advocates, again, this is not theoretical, this is very tangible. They are so critical, and we have data over decades from various jurisdictions how actually having an independent voice that monitors how children are doing and the rights of children actually results in increased well-being amongst young people. So, you know, because young people are the only part of the folks that we represent that actually don't get a chance to vote. They are effectively silenced in the process that we're in. So we were all very excited when this government announced its intention to establish a Child and Youth Commission, and I will say the PC's proposed a very unusual model that doesn't actually exist anywhere else in the world. However, then the intent was clarified that model would still continue to have investigative powers, that it would undertake important research, and I would say that community rallied around this. Community was super excited about what was coming forward, and we heard repeated commitments from the Minister of Community Services to this commission. And yet here we are in a budget where there's no allocation for a Child and Youth Commission. We haven't seen the legislation. In the fall, over the fall, there was a great deal of public engagement and engagement of youth. And youth engagement is really important. So it's not just a nice thing to do, it's a right. Article 12 of the UNCRC guarantees it. It also results in better policy. And I can tell you what isn't good. We also know what is good youth engagement. And bad, and it isn't this. It isn't going out to engage folks and make promises and then not have a follow-up, not be clear, not tell people what's going on. That is not good youth engagement. And in fact, it's more damaging than not engaging young people at all.
Absolutely.
There's other things that we need to be doing to support young people, and I think I'll just turn to talking about the investment in places of safety. So places of safety, so it's in the budget as supporting young people with complex needs. Places of safety are actually a rights violation for young people, and we need to get them out of our system. So in 2020, 151 children were in places of safety, which means they're in hotels, they're in apartments, they're in cabins in the woods. With unqualified people, they're not safe. And this really is, so to call it investments in helping children with complex needs is inappropriate. These are our most vulnerable children without a family advocate, without a provincial advocate, without a right to vote, and we're leaving them alone with